When you look, we started this series called Dysfunctional. What we're doing is we're looking at people that are in the family tree, the family lineage of Jesus according to the Gospels. And we're looking at the fact that God chose some people to be in his family tree that are messed up. There's some weirdies. Anybody have some weirdies in your family? All right. If you don't, you're the one. Okay. So in their case, I think it should encourage us that if God used a messed up family tree for his son, that he can use your family too. In the midst of whatever, if you're dysfunctional and things are not the way that you'd like them to be, it doesn't preclude God from working. And so in this series, we're looking at some of those people. And so last week we looked at David. This week, I want to look at Abraham and his dysfunction and how he overcame it. And I want you to think about Abraham. And when you do, there's one, spiritual trait. There's one thing that he's most known for. And if you were to say the name Abraham, people would say, what? What is the one character trait that he's most known for? I'm going to test your abilities or your knowledge of the Bible here. Faith. He is known as a person of great faith. When people preach on Abraham, they're usually preaching on faith and how to have faith. That's what he's most known for. He left his father and his father's family. He went. Now, we kind of just skip over that sometimes without thinking about the culture of that day. But it's not like, hey, I got a job offer from another city 100 miles away. I'll see you guys at Christmas. And it was, you were moving. And there was not a social network there. There wasn't a cultural support system that was undergirding that decision. It was a complete step of faith, going, I've got nothing, and I'm leaving. I'm going there, and I'm just believing that God's going to provide it was a big deal. And so it was a huge step of faith when he left his father and his father's family. They operated as generations living together. And he's going to a place that he has not known. And a pretty powerful, big step of faith. He was willing to obey God, to sacrifice, being willing to sacrifice his son Isaac. He's found in the Hall of Fame of Faith in Hebrews chapter 11, and he gets 3 mentions. Most of the people in the Hall of Fame of Faith only get 1. He gets 3. It talks about 3 different snapshots from his life. In Romans chapter 4, Abraham is called the spiritual father of all who have faith. Is anybody here this morning and you have faith? You believe in Jesus? All right, Abraham is your father. There's 10 of us here this morning that have faith. That's great. It's fantastic. I got my work cut out for me this morning. Right? But he is the father of all of us who have faith. And so Abraham is a very interesting character in Scripture. And here's something that you may not know about Abraham. What was his greatest dysfunction? This man of faith and power, the thing that most tripped him up, the thing that caused him to stumble the most was fear. Abraham, the man of faith, and his dysfunction was the presence of fear. And so this is what I want you to understand. Now, we have to look at the fact that there is good fear and bad fear. Right? There's some healthy fear. We had an incredible example that went viral in about the last 8 to 10 days. Anybody hear the story of the grandma who killed the bobcat with her bare hands? Come on, Grandma. That was an awesome story. So she walks out of her house. She's walking towards her vehicle, and all of a sudden there is a bobcat underneath her vehicle, and it's in the attack position, and it's coming at her. And all she can think of is, if I scream, my grandkids who are in the house will come out to see what happened, and they will be killed. And so this bobcat attacks her, and she's being attacked without screaming. And she gets her hands around the bobcat's neck and just kills it with her bare hands. And I'm like, yeah, come on, Grandma. That was an awesome story. Now, if you're like a bobcat advocate, I'm sorry, okay? I don't mean to be cruel, but you would have killed that bobcat if given the chance in the same situation, or you would have been killed. And so this was one of those cases that, sometimes fear, good fear, allows you to do some things that you couldn't do otherwise. Maybe you've heard stories of moms being able to pick up a car because their kid was underneath it. And in any other circumstance, there's no way that mom could pick up that car. But in that moment, right, fear allows us to do some things that we couldn't do otherwise. Now, bad fear it actually has the opposite effect. And instead of allowing us to do some things that we couldn't do otherwise, it freezes us from doing anything. It kind of paralyzes us in place. But faith can catalyze fear into action. And so here's what I hope that you learn in this message today. One of a few things, really, is fear doesn't mean you don't have faith. Sometimes when we have experienced fear, we think, I don't have any faith. And that's not what it means. Fear doesn't mean you don't have faith. William Shakespeare is quoted as having said, your greatest strength begets your greatest weakness. And so he's saying, as having great faith, sometimes we're going to also have seasons of fear. We're going to have moments of fear. And the way that you develop greater faith is when you're experiencing greater faith or greater fear, and you take some steps. And we're going to talk about that as we go along. Now, his portion, Abraham's portion of Genesis, takes up the greater parts of chapters 12 through 25, or about a quarter of the book of Genesis. And so, as we did last week, we're going to do a little bit of a flyover route this morning and just capture some snapshots of Abraham's life, and understanding that this portion of the message is going to be a little lengthy. But what I want you to see is it wasn't like Abraham has this great start of faith, and then his life goes up and to the right, and then he goes off into eternity. What I want you to see is he had great faith, and then he had some struggles with fear, and then he had great faith, and then he had struggles, and we're going to see this throughout this thread woven throughout his life. But let's start with Genesis chapter 12, and at this point in his life, his name is Abram. His name gets changed later, but I want you to hear when I read Abram and Sarai that those later become Abraham and Sarah, but I'm not mispronouncing their name at this point, okay? Genesis chapter 12, verse 1 says, the Lord said to Abram, leave your native country, your relatives, and your father's family, and go to the land that I will show you. And that's a big deal, too, the land I will show you, right? He says, get moving, and I will show you. You're going to, I feel like, God just directed me to share this, so maybe this is for you. But one of the things that I talk to people about often, so I didn't say this to any of the other services. You get a freebie, an extra little message today. But one of the things that I tell people when they're struggling with whether to take a step or not is you have to take a step for God to direct it. If you wait until you get the full blueprint of what you're supposed to do, you're not going to take a step. In this case, it says, the land I will show you. He says, take a step and I'll turn on the GPS. But until you take the step, and if you understand, like as long as you're parked in the car, the GPS can't really tell you where to go because it doesn't know which direction you're heading because you're not heading a direction, you're sitting there parked. So you have to actually get moving for the Spirit to say, turn left. That's your next turn, turn right. You're going the wrong way, make a U-turn. We have to get moving for it to do that. So he says, go to the land I will show you. Get moving. All right. Verse 4. So Abram departed as the Lord had instructed. Great faith. He obeyed, he listened, he did as the Lord instructed. Verse 7. Then the Lord appeared to Abram and said, I will give this land to your descendants. And Abraham built an altar there and dedicated it to the Lord who had appeared to him. What a great start for Abraham. I mean, he's way up here. This is incredible faith. He's stepping out on his own. He's obeying God. He's worshiping God in the midst of all this. That's verse 7. Verse 10, 3 verses later. At that time, a severe famine struck the land of Canaan, forcing Abram to go down to Egypt where he lived as a foreigner. As he was approaching the border of Egypt, Abram said to his wife Sarai, look, you are a very beautiful woman. Very smooth talker for a husband. Sometimes you stop the smooth talking after you're married. Abram didn't. Look, you are a very beautiful woman. When the Egyptians see you, they will say, this is his wife, let's kill him. Then we can have her. She had to be very attractive, by the way. So please tell them that you are my sister. Then they will spare my life and treat me well because of their interest in you. So he is dangling his wife, his beautiful wife, as a carrot in order for things to go well for him. Question is, did he care how they would treat his wife? It doesn't sound like it. And sure enough, when Abram arrived in Egypt, everyone noticed Sarai's beauty. When the palace officials saw her, they sang her praises to Pharaoh, their king, and Sarai was taken into his palace. Then Pharaoh gave Abram many gifts because of her: sheep, goats, cattle, male and female donkeys, male and female servants, and camels. But the Lord sent terrible plagues upon Pharaoh and his household because of Sarai, Abram's wife. So Pharaoh summoned Abram and said, "What have you done to me? Why didn't you tell me she was your wife? Why did you say, 'She is my sister,' and allow me to take her as my wife? Now then, here's your wife. Take her and get out of here." Pharaoh ordered some of his men to escort them, and he sent Abram out of the country along with his wife and all of his possessions. All the things that he gave him, he sent with him. This was definitely not an example of faith for Abram, right? You can't read that story and say, "What great faith." But it was an example of fear. That fear doesn't mean that you don't have faith. In chapter 15, God promises Abram that he will have descendants as numerous as the stars in the sky, even though he had no children, and they were past the age of bearing children. And the Bible says, and Abram believed the Lord. Right? So he starts up here, he goes down here, he's going back up now. In chapter 16, Sarai had been unable to have children, so she thought, you know what? I think we need to help God out here. And so Abram, here's Hagar, Abram, and Abram says, no way. God told us that he was going to fulfill this promise. I don't think we need to help him. We just need to do it the way that God said to do it. No, he didn't do that. He said, "Yes, dear," and fathered Ishmael, trying to help God. I don't think that's probably up in the higher stratospheres of his faith story. Chapter 17 and 18, God changes the name of Abram and Sarai to Abraham and Sarah, and he promises in both chapters that he's going to fulfill this promise of their descendants being so vast and so great, and he's going to do it through their child, not through Ishmael, but through their child that they're going to have. When they received this promise, Sarah was 89 years old, and Abraham was 99 years old. I mean, that wouldn't even be a welcome promise, would it? I mean, I'm only 48, and I can tell you right now, would not be a welcome promise in my household that we're about to have a child next year. I mean, like, no, grandchild maybe. No, I don't want a baby. I sleep good. I don't want to go back. In the rest of chapter 18 and 19, it is the story of Abraham interceding for Sodom and Gomorrah and how God rescued his nephew Lot and his family because of Abraham's intercession. And then in chapter 20, as they were moving around, they approached another country, the country of Gerar. And Abraham, because of fear, told the people of that country that Sarah was his sister. He did it again. Come on, man. He did it again. And God protects Sarah again by sending King Abimelech a dream which lays out and tells him the full truth. After this dream, he confronts Abraham. What have you done to us? What crime have I committed that deserves treatment like this, making me and my kingdom guilty of this great sin? No one should ever do what you have done. Whatever possessed you to do such a thing? Abraham replied, I thought, this is a godless place. It's not a good start when you're talking to the king of a country to say, this is a godless place. They will want my life and will kill me to get her. And really, she is my sister, for we both have the same father, but different mothers, and I married her. And when God called me to leave my father's home and to travel from place to place, I told her, do me a favor, wherever we go, tell the people that I am your brother. Now, it was not faith that motivated that whole story, right, with him in this another example. It was fear. He was driven by fear. He allowed fear in the driver's seat. We can allow faith to be in the driver's seat, or we can allow fear to be in the driver's seat, but one of them's driving. And in this case, he moved over and said, here, Have a seat, fear. In chapter 21, Isaac, the son of promise, was born, and there was great rejoicing for a little bit until Sarah saw Hagar and Ishmael making fun of baby Isaac, or toddler Isaac at this point, and she insisted that Abraham send his other family away. He will never share in the inheritance. And then in chapter 22, God tested Abraham's faith by asking him to sacrifice Isaac, and Abraham passed the test. He was willing. Hebrews 11:19 says Abraham reasoned that if Isaac died, God was able to bring him back to life again. So that was an incredible statement of faith. Like, I believe God has said that the promise is through this child, but now he's asking me to sacrifice this child. So if I follow through with that, I believe God's just going to raise him from the dead. How many of you would say that's an incredible level of faith that Abraham had? In chapter 23, he buries Sarah. In chapter 24, he marries Isaac to Rebekah, and he does it by giving his servant like extremely detailed instructions. And when the servant gets to this other country, he figures out like the instructions were perfect. I mean, it was a step of faith. This is what's going to happen, and this is who's going to be there, and all that takes place. And then in chapter 25, Abraham dies. So what can we learn from this flyover of Abraham's story that would apply to our lives today? I think is this: fear doesn't mean you don't have faith. Abraham trusted God in some really big, momentous occasions in his life. Again, leave your father and your father's family. One story I didn't read, he goes to war with countries. As a family patriarch, he goes to war with other countries in order to protect and rescue his nephew Lot and his family. He believed God that he would give Abraham and Sarah vast descendants in spite of their old age. Again, he was willing to sacrifice Isaac. And in all of those major faith decisions, Abraham had faith. He trusted God. He believed God. Faith was in the driver's seat. But Abraham had many other times when he gave in to fear, that he let fear have the driver's seat. And most of those had to do with self-preservation, right? He put Sarah at great risk because of fear. He went along with Sarah's plan B with Hagar because of fear that God wasn't going to come through. He put Hagar and Ishmael, I think, at great risk because of fear. And he told white lies on multiple occasions because of fear. And maybe we could say it this way: when the story of his life was about fear, where was his focus? His focus was on himself. Fear's focus is us. What about me? How's this going to impact me? Right? We practice the opera, me. In that moment, that's fear's focus, is me. Faith's focus isn't me. Faith's focus is way, way higher. Faith's focus is him. Faith's focus is God. And so I want you to understand that the father of our faith experienced fear many times. And when you go through your life and you look backwards in the rearview mirror, there's going to be some seasons that you go, man, those are some faith stories. I mean, I remember believing in God. I remember he was going to see us through, and he did, and it was a great faith story. But in the same rearview mirror is going to be some times when you say, I think I missed that one. I think that I let fear drive in that moment or in that season. But just because you have faith doesn't mean you won't experience fear. There's not that promise. Here is something that I've learned, though, about faith when I'm experiencing fear. And I think these three words could set you free. Do it afraid. Don't wait till you don't experience fear to do something. Don't wait until you've got all your T's crossed and your I's dotted before you take that step. Learn to do it afraid. What is it you're afraid of? Is it public speaking? Is it asserting yourself or making decisions, or a fear of intimacy or being known or changing jobs? Maybe it's a fear of sharing your faith, or of being alone, or a fear of tragedy, or a fear of aging. In Susan Jeffers' classic book, Feel the Fear and Do It Anyway. Great book, by the way. Secular book, great book. Feel the fear and do it anyway. She says that the underlying attitude to all of our fears is 4 words. I can't handle it. I can't handle it. right? I can't handle public speaking. I can't handle asserting myself. I can't handle making decisions. I can't handle intimacy or being known. I can't handle changing jobs. I can't handle sharing my faith and the rejection that could potentially experience. I can't handle being alone. I can't handle aging. I can't handle tragedy. It's this underlying statement of I can't handle that. And so we have this fear that I can't do it. I can't. What if you change that mantra because you're preaching to yourself every time you say those words, I can't do that, and it develops and it grows a fear within you? What if you change that mantra to, with God's help, I can? With God's help, I can handle it. Whatever it is. Like, it doesn't matter what it is. It doesn't matter if it's tragedy. It doesn't matter the level or the difficulty that we're going through. If we change that mantra with, you know what, with God's help, I can face it. With God's help, I can handle it. With God's help, I can overcome it. With God's help, I can. And I think that's the message we think of, with God's help, I can handle public speaking. With God's help, I can handle asserting myself or making decisions. With God's help, I can handle being known or changing jobs or sharing my faith. With God's help, I can handle tragedy. With God's help, I can. And I think that fits so well with Philippians 4:13. I have learned the secret. I've learned the secret of facing plenty, having faith, and facing hunger, fear, of having abundance, faith, and being in need, fear. What was the secret he learned? That I can do all things, which gives me strength. Wrong secret. He learned I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. That sounds an awful lot like, with God's help, I can. With God's help, I can face anything. Through Christ, I can do all things through him who strengthens me. What it's saying is I may experience fear, but I don't have to let that stop me. With God's help, I can handle whatever comes my way. So learn to do it afraid. To take the step of faith anyway. To get out of the boat anyway. Now, you have to understand that we're not talking about that we just walk around presumptuously stepping out of boats and taking steps of faith. It has to be that God's led you to take that. Reading that, take on the lion. Pick up the sling and the stone. Build an ark. Tell the sun to stand still. Pray for someone to be healed or delivered with someone. Believe what God has promised. And do it afraid. Do it afraid. If you wait to do something again until you don't have any fear, you're going to do that. Don't you remember your past? Don't you remember the things that are back there? Don't you remember the things that you've done? And instead of being silenced in fear, you go, I'm pretty sure God knew all that when he asked me to do this. And so I take the step. And it allows my faith to grow. We just take a step. We do it afraid. And I don't know about you, I'm encouraged by this story of Abraham because one of the things that's amazing about the Bible is it doesn't polish and spit shine the heroes of the faith. On full display are their dysfunctions. On full display are their sins. On full display are the fact that they're not perfect. And for me, that encourages me because he was a man of great faith, but guess what? He was also somebody that struggled with fear a few times in his life. And it seems that he was able to believe God for some really big things, and yet at the same time, he fell into fear in some really small, insignificant areas that had to do with him. Can I tell you that at least this, it's not heroic to hide behind your wife, men, all right? I mean, he basically said, here, you take the bullet, babe, all right? This is all about my protection, my safety. We can at least agree that wasn't heroic. But the point of the message today isn't that, like, you should fear. Like, let's lay it out. You should just be afraid. That's not, please don't, hopefully you didn't get that. But it's this, if you do experience fear, or maybe it's more properly put, when you experience fear, don't let that stop you. Because with God's help, I can. With God's help, I don't stop. Don't let that stop you from taking the step of faith, because faith only really grows when it's put to the test. And faith being tested is different than failing faith. James chapter 1, 2 through 4, and the voice says, don't run. Can I add 2 words real quick? In fear. Right? I think that's the message being sent here. It's don't run from tests and hardships. Don't run in fear from tests and hardships, brothers and sisters. As difficult as they are, you will ultimately find joy in them if what? If you embrace them, your faith will grow. Your faith will blossom under pressure and teach you true patience as you overcome victoriously. You would expect that, like that would be the end result. But what's he say? And it'll teach you true patience as you endure. Sometimes that's the victory. When you're going through a season of great trial and great difficulty, the victory is I hung on to Jesus. I hung on to my faith as I went through it. And you know what? There is a spiritual strength to just enduring. You just make it through. You get through that particular season, that particular fear. You just get through on the other side, and there is victory in that. Fear doesn't mean you don't have faith. So learn to do it afraid. And watch as your faith grows. Every head bowed and every eye closed this morning. And I want you to close your eyes, and I want you to just think about you and your walk with God. And I want to ask this question. Where is fear, what areas in your life is fear trying to take the wheel, trying to take control? Where are those areas that fear is trying to take the wheel in your life? Secondly, what if, in the face of fear, you take the step of faith anyway? What if you simply did it afraid? And what if you lived life with a new mantra? And instead of saying, I couldn't do that, instead of saying, I can't handle that, instead of saying, I couldn't possibly, that we learn to say, with God's help, I can. With God's help, I can handle it. With God's help, I can do it. So as we sing this last song that says, faithful you are, it also says all of God's promises are yes and amen. My question for you today isn't, do you have fear? But my question is, do you have faith? And will you choose faith even when you're experiencing fear? Because when we can do that, we can follow Abraham's example, and we can be known for our faith even though we've experienced fear. So as we sing, our prayer team's going to come up here, and if you don't have faith, you haven't experienced the forgiveness of Christ and have a relationship with God, if you haven't experienced that, they would love to pray for you for that. But if you're going through a season of fear,